I have to harken back to some of our previous conversations because the American Negro Theater, where Ozzie and Ruby perfected their craft, they also became, I call them artivists, activism and artistry. And they became cultural ambassadors for the black community, for leaders like Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, and so many other areas that they made it part of their signature that they were about equity.
Welcome back to part 2 of the Foxworth Theory. I am Eugenia Foxworth, and we're here with Voza Rivers, executive producer and founding member of New Heritage Theater, chairman and co-founder of the Harlem Arts Alliance, vice president of the Greater Harlem Chamber of Commerce, and executive producer of Harlem Week. Mr. Rivers, you founded New Heritage Theater Group back in 1964. To date, it is the oldest black nonprofit theater company in New York. What was the impetus behind creating it, and what type of productions are featured?
At age 18, I'd never seen a black play. I made a decision because of all of the systemic racism that was percolating in the 60s and all the challenges of what was happening in the South and lunch counter demonstrations with college students. I had made a decision that I would go ahead and take a public speaking course at the local YMCA in Harlem so that I could articulate how I felt about what was going on. The very first day that I attended this class, there was a guest speaker, and his name was Roger Furman. And Roger Furman spoke so eloquently about a library on 135th Street, a library that I attended as a young person in junior high school. And he spoke about some of the members of a theater company called the American Negro Theater. And what fascinated me around the story was I was going to that library, but I went in upstairs as a kid, and every week our teacher would take us for a 45-minute opportunity to review books or to meet with the librarian. So this guest speaker, Roger Furman, talked about it, and then he said, you know, I was the same age as a lot of you young people that are here today, and I joined a theater company called the American Negro Theater, and we were located on 135th Street, and some of the people who were part of the theater were Ozzie Davis Ruby Dee, Sidney Poitier, Harry Belafonte, Gertrude Jeanette, and a host of other names that people will not know unless they know black theater history. But when he talked about that, I says, oh, wow, this is really interesting. So it just piqued my interest, no more than that. And he mentioned that he was starting his own theater company. Now, the American Negro Theater existed in 1940. and it closed its doors in 1949 because a lot of the members became famous and they went on their separate careers. Harry Belafonte is a singer, Sidney Poitier is a movie actor, Ozzie and Ruby doing what they do. And what happened is that when he had concluded his speaking, he mentioned that he was starting his own theater company based on that same model of the American Negro Theater, and that he was looking for not volunteers, he was looking for people who might be interested in signing up to be a part of this new theater that he was going to create. And I did not volunteer because that was not my interest. I went specifically to be more articulate about things that I thought that I wanted to have a certain level of comfort in talking about. A number of people raised their hands and volunteered. I didn't, and he came to me and he says, "Young man, why wouldn't you want to know more about it? You seem interested." I says, "Yes, I was very interested in your story because I was upstairs as a kid and you were downstairs as a theater. And but I did not come here to become a member of any theater because I didn't want to be an actor." He says, no, there are many things that you can learn. And if you said that you wanted to be more confident in your elocution, then this would be a place. And then I thought about it, and he said, and you should never be quick to say no. Think about it. And I said to him that I would be a volunteer in the theater, but I would not be a member of the theater because I was not interested. And so I became a co-founder with him of his theater as a volunteer. And I volunteered for 6 years. And he came to me and he taught me how to focus lights. I was a prop person, I was a maintenance person, I was a box office, I did marketing. I did all of those things because he taught me. He allowed me to understand and absorb and to see what goes into making a theater. Came to me after 6 years and said, "Voza, you know, you've been with me, you go out with me, you take me everywhere because you have a car. Why don't I consider making you the business manager of the theater, and I could really concentrate more on the creative?" Because he was a playwright, he was the co-author of a book called The Black Book. He was a lecturer at colleges, and I was honored that he would even look and think of me because I wanted to just volunteer to help out the theater. And a number of years later, he died. But through the process, while he was living, I met Ozzie Davis and Ruby Dee. I met Harry Belafonte because they all came up to see the work. I met Sidney Poitier. They came to see the work that he was doing. And I was always there as a volunteer. I never wanted to receive any compensation for what I was doing because I was giving back to the community as the same way he was. When he passed of AIDS in 1983, the board of directors of the theater asked if I would step up and become the head of the theater. And I said, absolutely not. I didn't feel comfortable that I knew enough about the theater and the foundation. Although I learned a lot from Roger, it didn't make sense for me when you had all of these creative types who were members of the theater, and I thought that they would be more appropriate. And the board of directors said, Roger selected you for a reason, and we want you to continue Roger's legacy. And I had a conversation with Ozzie Davis and Ruby Dee after he died, and they said to me, Voza, Roger loved you, we love you, and we want you to know that whatever you want, whatever you need, we're here to support you. And 58 years later, I'm still there, still running the theater in his memory.
which is wonderful. And that is what the Harlem Village is about.
Yes.
The real Harlem Village.
Yes.
And that is something that I'm glad you're sharing, because there's so many different stories. And it's nice to have someone that has lived and that has experienced, that is sharing these stories.
Yes.
These days, Harlem churches like First Corinthian, one of the largest and most influential, open their doors to the arts, theatrical productions, enabling their parishioners and community folks to take advantage of the theater in a more affordable and economical way than Broadway. For example, how feasible is this concept?
I'm very appreciative of the faith-based institutions in our community in Harlem. I worked very closely with Abyssinian Baptist Church, which has a historic reputation. I'm on the board of First Corinthians on their Hope Center, and I work very closely. We call him Pastor Mike, but Mike Waldron. They're opening up their doors constantly to incorporate arts and culture. And I think that, again, I always hearken back to the past. There could not have been a positive civil rights outcome without the churches supporting the civil rights leaders and becoming a refuge for a lot of the activities and messaging and demonstrations and mobilizing that those pastors in those churches did because they believed in what needed to be done. So for me, knowing that history, I went to the churches. I'm at the Salvation Army Center. I'm at the Interchurch Center. I produce things at Riverside Theater. The Cathedral of St. John the Divine, the second largest cathedral in the world, happens to be in Harlem, and I produce work there. And they welcome me, and I share the culture with their parishioners. And because it's in the churches, there is no charge at all. There's great exposure, and I'm very pleased. It was never Roger's intention to go outside of the community when he created his theater. And yes, we built our own theater, but it was confined in terms of space. Our theater in those early years was 125 seats. Churches had capacity, and working with a lot of the ministers and bringing the kind of programming to their parishioners they were very, very appreciative. And so for me, my relationship with the churches are not only are they faith-based institutions, but they're partnerships, and that has assisted us being unique and different from a lot of other cultural institutions.
That is true. I mean, even if you go into St. John the Divine now, you will see two huge spaces where they've taken a part of the front of the chapel.
Yes.
I'm a member, and I'm there, but they have the indigenous people.
Yes.
And they're celebrating the people that were their family members. You don't see that anywhere. Right. I mean, it's just like they embrace the AIDS when we had AIDS. They were the first to embrace it. But yes, they still have to be careful because they're like radical to some people.
Yes.
But what you're doing is beautiful. Like I said, I could be a spy, but it's wonderful. Now we're going to take a short break, and we'll be right back in just a moment.
You hear that? It's the good stuff, huh, Keith?
gonna get to the bottom of this shit tonight.
Welcome back to our chat with Voza Rivers on the Foxworth Theory. I am Eugenia Foxworth. African Americans embraced Ozzie Davis and Ruby Dee as the preeminent performers of stage and screen. What was it about them as an acting duo that inspired you to introduce Black audiences to the theater?
You know, I have to harken back to some of our previous conversations, because the American Negro Theater, where Ozzie and Ruby perfected their craft, they also became, I call them artivists, activism and artistry. And they became cultural ambassadors for the Black community, for leaders like Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, and so many other areas that they made it part of their signature that they were about equity, respect for people of color. Ozzie and Ruby were a beautiful couple, but we also have to remember, coming out of that same group was Sidney Poitier, cultural ambassador, Harry Belafonte. They were all together. So to understand what they were doing, not only becoming actors, but becoming activists. And so I was fortunate enough that once I assumed leadership of the theater, that they were there. My very first Broadway play that I was involved in, Harry Belafonte produced it because he knew Roger Furman. Earlier I mentioned Ozzie and Ruby put a stamp of approval on me because they knew Roger Furman. It is amazing the people that I've met through arts and culture who were not just performers, but were real activists. And so for me, in my own way, I'm a cultural crusader. And some of the things that I've done is to become the voice of the voiceless who are practitioners in the arts and culture community in Harlem.
Yes, and another thing, you received from the United Nations in 1988, was it?
Yes.
A Medal of Peace. He's received other honors, but he never talks about it. I had to find and receive things to know. And that's a part of your activism. And also, let's not go any further without my saying this. Everyone is celebrating Lion King's 25th anniversary. You did Sarafina. And that I would like to know how this came about, because most of our audience, well, say half may know, but the other half may be interested in knowing about Sarafina. It was a South African play, and it was about the riots. Could you just briefly touch on that?
I was very, very fortunate with the theater. There was a young actress named Phyllis Yvonne Stickney, and she had a friend, his name was Duma Ngluvu from South Africa, who used to work with another South African editor of a newspaper in South Africa. His name was Stephen Biko. Stephen Biko was murdered by the South African government for putting truth to power, and he had his own vehicle. Duma arrives in New York, living with Hugh Masekela, another South African, on 116th Street and 7th Avenue. She brought Duma Bida Theater to see where she was developing her craft. This young man, this young student, met me and listened to me talk about what I was doing in theater. And he then educated me about the power of theater in South Africa and how it's been a tool to fight apartheid. And it was an interesting conversation that I was having with him. He said, Voza, to give you an example of how we do and address the issues, there's a play in New York called Woza Albert. Woza is a Zulu word for rise up. Albert was Albert Lutuli, the first African Global Peace Award winner. And this guy in South Africa wrote a play about him, and that play happens to be downtown on Christopher Street at the Lucille Lortel Theater. Voza, why don't we go down to the theater and see the work as opposed to me telling you, you could actually see it and experience it. I went down to Christopher Street in the Village, and I saw two actors on stage that had just won the prestigious Obie Award for Best Play, won it for the acting, won it for the script. And I said, oh my God, I have never seen acting like this before. And they're telling this story. When the show was over, I was escorted to meet the two actors. And they shared with me that they had been in New York for 6 weeks, playing to sold-out audience, won the most prestigious awards, and they didn't see any black people. Where are the black people? And I said, well, you know, you're downtown. There's a whole marketing that happens downtown and not uptown. Our newspapers don't get those ads. They're not on our radio station, so we don't know about this. And they said, and I shared with them, I said, you know, I have a small theater uptown on 125th Street and Lenox Avenue. And they said, well, why can't we go to your theater? And I shared with them, I said, well, you're here under an equity production contract that states that whoever brought you to the United States, they have to, and you have to adhere to the protocols of what that contract says. And the contract says that your show would only be performed at this particular theater, and that you cannot go into another theater because of the limitations of actors, especially coming out of South Africa, because the United States had made it law that actors should not go to South Africa because of the apartheid regime. So the guys looked at me and said, well, we want to go to Harlem. We got to go to your theater. And I said, well, you can't come. And I explained it again. The producer, white producer, heard the conversation. He says, Voza, these guys have to go back to South Africa in about a week or so. And maybe whatever they decide to do, the show is over with us. But before they go back, and he was really giving me the green light that I should have this conversation with these two actors. And I did that. And I took them because a New York Times reporter wrote this article from Soweto to the Village to Harlem. And the same show that they did downtown was now coming from downtown up to Harlem to my little theater. When these guys got to Harlem and saw those black people coming to see them, they were in Johannesburg or Soweto. The energy level that they did on that stage superseded whatever they did downtown. And what happened is that they said to me that whenever we do another play, we're not going downtown. We're coming to you, and we're coming to your theater. And so they were enthusiastic. They went ahead and went back home to South Africa and started working on another play. This other play was called A Cinemali. They called me up and says, Voza, get on the plane, come to South Africa, you got to see the work that we're doing. And I said, beautiful. I went to the embassy to get a visa, and they told me that I could not get a visa because I was considered an undesirable because of the play that I had just done a year earlier against their government. And so they would not let me in. I came back to the theater. I started making calls to South Africa and says, guys, unfortunately, I will not be able to come to South Africa. And I explained what happened. They said, Voza, listen, we're in rehearsal. And over the phone, I would listen to the rehearsals, and I was so moved. And I said, wow, this is what she said, this is why, Voza, this story that we want to tell is so important for the American audiences to see, and we want to do it. And I said, but I can't come and see it. But they would call me up constantly, and I'm listening. And I said, oh my God, I got to find a way to do this play. Sight unseen. I went to our funders for the theater, city funding, state funding, and everyone told me that why would they support me in bringing actors from 10,000 miles away in a black theater that should be focusing on the culture of the African American community. And I politely said that for 20 years, that's what we were doing. And we have a strong foundation. I'm not abandoning African American theater, I'm expanding. And they would not fund me, and I had money saved up for my kids' college tuition, and I took those dollars and brought those actors into the United States sight unseen. Sidney Poitier, not Sidney, but Harry Belafonte saw that show along with others and decided that that show should go to Broadway. And that was the first opportunity to take some of the work that we did to Broadway. So off-Broadway came uptown, and now directly from South Africa came these 5 actors. We went to Broadway, got nominated for a Tony Award. Okay, those actors and the same guy who wrote the plays, the other 2 plays, said, Voza, I'm going to do another play, and I don't care who wants to do it. It has to be done by you, and it has to be done in Harlem. And I said, wow, this is great. I felt good. First play had 2 actors. Second play had 5 actors. They knew the size of the theater. They went back and they started writing a play around a massacre that happened with school children in South Africa. It was called the Soweto Massacre. And the Soweto Massacre were black students in a school in the system, in the educational system in South Africa, wanting to have English as part of their curriculum. And the South African government said, no, you could only have 2 languages. Our language, which is called Afrikaans, and your native language. That would be it. The school children said, no, we want to learn English. And what they did is they protested. And the government said, you will do what we tell you to do, and they massacred over 400 students. They shot them down. That was the play that these guys wrote and said, Voza, you have to do it. And it's called Sarafina. And when I finally found out that there were 35 actors, I said, I can't. I mean, I have a 150-seat theater. How can I do this? Lincoln Center, who came up to see some of the earlier work, said, listen, Voza, we can go to South Africa and you can go with us. And I was able to get into South Africa and I saw the work. But it was of such magnitude that no matter what, I knew that our theater couldn't do it. But Lincoln Center stepped up and said, we will work with you. Then the South African, and then the Lincoln Center board at that point, John Lindsay was the chairman of their board, and he was a former mayor of the city of New York. And their board didn't need a New Heritage Voza Rivers Theater to be a partner in whatever they wanted to do with South Africa because they were Lincoln Center. And so the artistic director of the theater, Greg Moshe, said, Voza, we want to do the play, but it would be a Lincoln Center production. I said, it's okay. You're bringing in the culture. This is great. I'm going to help market and promote it. But the guys from South Africa said, our company in South Africa is called Committed Artists. We train those artists. We pay those artists to take our message across the countries. If Lincoln Center is interested, they have to come to you because you are now a part of Committed Artists. And in fact, we want you to head up Committed Artists US. And that began this solid relationship with Lincoln Center. And that show came in here. I took some of those I took the whole cast up to Harlem first, and we did performances at City College, performances at Lincoln Center, and then performances on Broadway. And the rest is history. So a lot of those actors were children when we did the play. One of the advantages of working with an organization like Lincoln Center and having an artistic director and an executive producer that really respected what we were doing in Harlem was very, very important. And now that I was going to be involved with Lincoln Center, one of the things that I wanted to do is to, first and always, come back to the community. So I was able to bring the entire cast of Sarafina to Harlem, to City College, and we did special performances for students and seniors, and then to the general public. That for me was extremely important because they got a chance to see it before it went to Broadway, and the rest is history. When Sarafina opened on Broadway, we had a 6-month advance for tickets that was unheard of for a black show, and it was a major success. So Sarafina, when it closed, after having the road companies and the young people really maturing while they were in the United States, there was this other opportunity because Disney was getting ready to launch another South African musical called The Lion King. A number of the actors from Sarafina were selected to be part of the cast of The Lion King. Our music director was selected to be the musical director for The Lion King. The young man who introduced me to South Africa, Duma Ngluvu, became the international agent for acquiring talent for The Lion King. And some of our musicians were also part of The Lion King. So we were 10 years their senior doing South African work. And for me, I didn't understand how important it was because that was the first South African musical to go to Broadway and to, of course, be nominated for 5 Tony Awards. And it just changed history. And of course, The Lion King, with the same feel of music that existed in Sarafina, went on to become this 25-year blockbuster, all-time revenue-generating show on Broadway. There's not been a show on Broadway that has made more money than for their investors than The Lion King.
And that is so true. And that's why it's so important for you to have shared this story with our audience, because everyone knows Lion King, but a lot do not know Sarafina and what did it. And the one thing I always say is that people are all standing on the shoulders of others today. The past is the future, which you said. Now, there's one question I would like to ask you, and that is the Harlem Arts Alliance is now in its 21st year as a cultural arts
Art service organization.
Yes, art service organization, yes. I'm getting winded and overwhelmed with the history that you're giving to us. So tell me, did you realize 48 years ago that it would draw such a mammoth juggernaut of excitement?
No, but again, going back in terms of the history of Harlem, we know that when we do something and we do it well, it resonates. It becomes adopted. One of the things that I was real clear about was that a lot of the smaller institutions and the people who create things, visual artists, choreographers, that may not get the attention because they're not institutions, but they also they're contributors to the arts and culture. So creating something like the Harlem Arts Alliance gave me that platform. But little did I know that in 1964, there was another art service organization called the Harlem Cultural Council. And the Harlem Cultural Council, back in the early 1960s, they had Romeo Bearden as a board member, Jacob Lawrence, the people who created Jazzmobile. All of these artists were part of another movement out of the 60s, and that lasted until 1983. My lane was, I was just being introduced to theater, so I had no idea that these organizations existed. And then about 2 years ago, a young man came to me to tell me about what happened in 1964 with the other art service organization. It lasted for 20 years, by the way. And he brought to me all of this archival material for me to read. And it was daunting. It might have been, I don't know, over 1,000 pages of a 20-year history of an art service organization with contracts, names, all of the stuff. And then for me, when I created the Harlem Arts Alliance, because my partner Jamal Joseph, a filmmaker, could get students from Columbia University where he taught, we documented every meeting on video. So now there's the Harlem Cultural Council that had archival material, not video, and then now you have the Harlem Arts Alliance that started in 2001, and everything that we've done is virtual, digital. And so now I'm sitting on this collection of archival and virtual. I'm talking with the president of City College, and I met with him because I would love for it to be part of the curriculum of a Harlem university where people can learn about this history. I have enough materials that some of it, once this donation happens, can be replicated and given to historic black colleges, because the name Harlem resonates globally. And I really want to have two opportunities to share the history of these two organizations, because it's different to talk about the history that is not publicized. And it's the work, the grunt work, the work that these art service organizations do with making sure that the institutions are in compliance, that the institutions can support itself, to learn all the kind of things that you need to know when you have your own business. That's what arts advocacy is about, and to get respect. And so those are the things that I'm still working on, and I hope at some point to come back and share with you that the gift has been accepted. We're in negotiations now about the gift, but I'm very positive that the legacy will continue.
And I too. I would like to say you've answered a lot of the other questions. So we know what you envision for the future of Harlem. And I want to thank you so much. And yes, we will have you back. I'm sure my audience is just waiting for the next part of my interview with you, Mr. Voza Rivers. I want to thank you for joining us on the Foxworth Theory and offering your candid and captivating presentation on Harlem, both then and now, and also for capturing an undeniably scintillating picture of Harlem that will forever leave an indelible mark on a community of pure richness and beauty. I also am just pleased that you're here. And at this moment, I would also like to thank a filmmaker, producer, and writer, Andrew Fountain, founder of 12-3 Productions, for sponsoring the Foxworth Theory. His new film, False Pretenses, debuts on Thanksgiving Day in Pennsylvania. The movie will also be available for streaming on Thanksgiving Day, so go to www.falsepretensesthemovie.com for more information. The Foxworth Theory airs Tuesdays and Thursdays at 9 p.m. I'm Eugenia Foxworth. Thank you for watching.
Hear that? It's the good stuff, huh, Keith?
We gonna get to the bottom of this shit tonight.
Hi, this is Eugenia Foxworth. Thank you so much for tuning into the Foxworth Theory. We are celebrating going into our 3rd season. Can you believe that? We are opening our doors to sponsorships for the Foxworth Theory. For more information, go to thefoxworththeory.com or email us at pr@thefoxworththeory.com. Thank you.